Matt, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
100%. Dude, this is super cool. I've never done, we were joking about this before we press record. Your newborn is in your arms, for those not watching the video, and hands down Guinness Book of World Records for the youngest person on a podcast ever. So thanks for giving me the clout on that. But dude, the commitment, I appreciate it. Thanks for joining me.
No worries, buddy. Looking forward to it.
100%. So for people that don't know you and your story, give us the spark notes. Who you are, where are you coming from? What are you doing now?
Look, the long story short is I always describe myself as an investor and an entrepreneur who's made a career of mistakes, and I'm kind of using those mistakes nowadays to try and not make them again myself, but also to teach others and to benefit my own businesses. I mean, like, I'm 42 now. I wanted to start a business when I was kind of 11, 12, 13. Didn't really know why. But back in the kind of late 80s, early 90s, the perception was the only way to make any real money was to own your own business. So I decided I was going to own my own business. I kind of consumed every business book possible. I sold every product I could get my hands on. As a teenager, I was selling Tamagotchi pets and inflatable chairs. I was a table magician in the local restaurant. I bought and sold a couple of web domain names, anything I could to try and make some money. None of it really worked. My first proper business was working in a family business selling uniforms, which was a business that my dad had invested in. I convinced him to let me take over it because it was failing and he wasn't prepared to put the time or the effort into it. So I spent 3 years in there dealing with every conceivable problem, took it from a £300,000 loss to a £30,000 profit. Which not huge numbers of profit, but conceptually, being thrown at the deep end and learning everything I could learn to kind of work my way around it. Left there when I was about 21 because I felt I'd done my bit and I was a bit bored, and went off to work in leisure. Opened my first pub, not very successful. Knew I needed something with higher margin, and moved on to strip clubs. Again, I didn't really know anything about them. Other than that, I spent a lot of time in them personally, which deemed me knowledgeable enough to convert that personal knowledge into I guess a corporate setting. Opened my first club in 2004. It hit the ground running, and over the next 4 years, spent most of my time learning how to borrow money to be able to scale very capital-intensive businesses. And by 2008. I was the biggest strip club operator in the UK. I had 65 other bars and pubs, restaurants, property portfolio, finance company, and a credit crunch kicked in. I was over leveraged and undercapitalized, and lost a lot overnight in kind of August, September 2008. And I guess that's the end of the first big chapter of my life. And then I kind of rebuilt from there, and where it takes me up to now is that I've lent over 500 million to businesses in the UK. I raise my money internationally from high net worth investors, deploy it onto UK businesses, and bring both capital and the experience of my history and my mistakes. Because you typically find that business owners wanting to borrow money don't just have a capital problem; they have a knowledge gap, and we find ourselves in a very unique position as a lender to be able to bring those two.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out where to start there because that's a really good background.
I tried to keep it short for you as well.
No, I know, that's fantastic, dude. It's such an eclectic story. So I guess let's start. I'm really curious about some of those early years of business because, well, even before that, I can relate. Like, I'm trying to look around here. I have a duct tape wallet on my desk somewhere. That was like my first business, making duct tape wallets in like 5th grade. Before I got a quote unquote real job and started working in retail. But those first couple of years, I'm specifically curious about using leverage to scale capital intensive businesses. But talk to me about some of those lessons early on. You said you opened your first pub in 2004, and then by 2008, you were the largest strip club owner in the UK, 65 pubs. Like, yep. Very over leveraged, but like, talk to me about those 4 years. Like, what you said, the first pub was not that successful. So what did some of those lessons look like in that part of the journey?
I guess the reason it wasn't successful and what took me from the pub to the strip club was the lack of multiple income streams, and quite particularly the lack of a high margin income stream. We were selling a very commoditized product, and I guess I'm trying to answer this question in a way that can be more generically applied to lots of different people's business. But we were selling a product that anyone else could buy to a customer base that were completely price driven. We had no control over the supply base. We had no control over the margins, and ultimately it meant that we didn't have the profit and the cash flow to be able to make much money, and b scale those businesses. And that was what appealed to me about the strip club business, because when you're operating just a simple pub, your only income stream is the alcohol, is the wet sales, and we typically be working to a margin of say 65-70%. When we had the strip club, the alcohol sales only constituted a third of the overall sales. Back in those days, the mix changed as time went on, but back in those days, the income mix was a third alcohol, a third money that people would pay to walk through the front door, and a third the money that we'd earn from having the girls. And we were selling the alcohol more expensive in there than we would do in a normal bar anyway, because obviously we've got a captive market and we can within reason charge what we want. So our wet margin is 75-80%, but our margin on the girls and our margin on the door is 100%. So when you apply all that together, or when you consolidate that, we've got a 90% plus 90% plus margin, and not only is the margin higher, the operating costs of that business are so much lower, because it's all about high value, low volume customers. We could take, back in those days, let's say 15,000-20,000 pounds on a Saturday night, and we do that from 150 customers and service that with 8 or 9 members of staff. If I was going to take 15,000 pounds in a normal bar, in a normal nightclub, I'd need 20 doormen, I'd need 800 customers. And so I guess I learned it by accident, but it was my I guess initiation into understanding getting the margins as high as possible and the operating costs as low as possible.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As you were starting that answer, where my mind was going was speaking about the pubs specifically. Like, I'm always curious what it would be like to run a business. How do I say this? To run a business where like there's a need on a daily basis and it's wildly apparent. I guess what I mean by that,
you mean the need for people to go and drink alcohol in that venue,
kind of like something that people are already doing every single day. Like in our industry, yeah, people probably know they want it, but on a daily basis, they're not going and spending thousands and thousands of dollars because they need it. It's like, we need to create the value, market it properly, speak to the problems, and then obviously add the value on the back end so that everyone's a raving fan and we can continue to grow. I'm always curious about things that like people are already consuming on a daily basis, and we just become the place that they do it. Now, around the pub topic, if the margins are not that high and it is very price driven, it almost like, to me, it sounds like it just becomes entirely like brand and experience dependent. Does that resonate? Does that make sense?
So yeah, no, I know I'm with you on what you're saying, and I guess there's probably two kinds, well, at least two kinds of operation. I mean, look, the first kind of pubs we operated were very much what you would call something that someone has a need for. I mean, these were community pubs. These are in the middle of what in the UK we call a council estate, which is probably a better version of what you guys in the US are called the projects, really. And these would be you'd have one or two maximum in that particular area, and this would serve the kind of hub of social activity in the community. It would be the place that everybody went drinking, and a lot of the people that went drinking in there, I mean, that was their whole life. They didn't have a job. Their income was coming from probably some kind of social security, and they they would come in there day in, day out. So I guess, you've got a guaranteed customer base, but it's a guaranteed customer base without much money to spend. But it is a very predictable income. So I guess, the downside of that business is the margins are always going to be poor, and the income is always going to have a ceiling to where you can take it. But the plus side of it is it's a very, very predictable income stream. And where the business goes at that end of the market is that ultimately people buy lots and lots and lots of these pubs, because they're effectively just buying predictable income stream, and then it becomes, how do you finance them? Can you securitize them? And you're effectively just buying a future cash flow.
Yeah.
Your other kind of bars are being more fashion led, city center type things, where your people are going there because it's the coolest place in town, because it's the new club, it's the DJ, it's socially led, it's celebrity led, it's fashion led, it's whatever it is. I mean, that's a very different model, and yes, the income's higher, yes, the margins are higher, but then also, the fashions change on that. These bars are good for 3, 4, 5 years. Geography changes, fashion changes, refits and refurbishments need to happen, and I guess, it's horses for courses. I always preferred the more, the community pubs, because it was simple and predictable. Someone else may prefer the other ones because they're sexy. I mean, I guess the lesson you take from any of these things is that everybody else's business sounds better than your own. You probably jump from one business to the next business to avoid the problems of your own. But the reality is, the grass isn't greener on the other side. It's just a different shade depending on how actively you're watering it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. I'm thinking back, so like growing up, Thanksgiving Eve, the night before Thanksgiving, was always like the big party night. When you've graduated, you just turned 21, and everyone's back in town, whether like from college or whatever, right? And I remember growing up, like watching the bar that everybody went to completely change every couple of years. And that's just like a small scale, but it speaks to exactly what you're talking about. Like, you may be out of fashion in a couple of years, and then you have to rinse and repeat. But with that said, like, and then there's also the other side of it. Like, what's it? LVMH just became the first $500 billion company in the UK or in Europe, wherever it's located,
Really?
which is insane. And like, I mean, it's all brand, right? Like, the craftsmanship is solid, but like the actual substance of the product, it's the same as these other brands for the most part. Not to speak down, like the brand is impressive, but I guess I'm sharing that to illustrate the importance of brand.
What they've got at LVMH, it's not just the brand and the desirability of that brand. I mean, it's the way that they get to control it. And because there's many brands out there, but what typically happens with brands is, people start a brand, they get a little bit of distribution, it gets popular, they get more distribution, they then over distribute, and some kind of problem happens along the way. What LVMH are fantastic at doing is controlling that distribution down to a T, and I can talk about this firsthand, because one of my businesses is actually a luxury e-com retailer, and we sell some of the brand, we sell brands from the likes of Caring and I mean, not specifically Louis, but in that sector. And as a retailer, it looks on the face of it very sexy that we get to sell a brand like a Balenciaga, like a Stella McCartney or a Versace, because you think, oh, well, that brand's got the power to bring the customers through the door, and it does. But the reality is, we're completely controlled and dictated to by that by that brand owner. They tell us how much we can buy, how we have to pay for it, what price we have to sell it at, and then when we've done a good job of building it up for them, they decide that they want to go D2C and pull our account anyway. But I guess we're talking in a bit off on a tangent, but it goes back to what you're saying. It's the importance of having that brand, of having the control and the desirability of it.
100%. So I want to go back to, and you kind of answered a future question of mine, talking about the predictability of the income stream. So You mentioned that after you learned these lessons in the first pub, then you got into the strip club business, you started to grow from there, and then you started to figure out how you could leverage capital to fund all these capital intensive industries. Um, is that why you went that route? Because you felt comfortable, like, okay, I can go and leverage someone else's capital, creatively fund all of these different businesses, and the income stream is predictable, so I feel good betting on it. Was that the thought process?
Being honest, I don't really think there probably wasn't a thought process back then. You know, it was kind of finding my feet and just always moving forward. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
it was very much a learning experience. I mean, I remember when I first got leverage. You know, when I first raised money against that first strip club, I didn't even really know what I was doing. I mean, you know, I got introduced to a finance broker. He came to see me and explained to me that, you know, because I'd already paid for my air conditioning, you know, I effectively had my capital tied up. But he could, you know, he could get me to sign a document which effectively transferred ownership of my AC to him, and I'd then pay him a rental to rent it back for the next 3 years or 4 years. And I didn't really understand what he meant, but he basically said, sign these papers, and I'll put 30 grand in your bank tomorrow, and you know, you can pay me 500 pounds a month, you know, for the next 3 or 4 years. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. You know, sign that, and then it was, well, how do I? What else have I got that I can start to sale and lease back? So I was not doing it from a position of knowledge or plan or intelligence when I started. It was, I guess, it was accident and necessity. But yeah, you know, as I guess as I've learned from that, and then as time's gone on for me, you know, being able to be in businesses which are easier to financially leverage has always been a key component of the things that I want to do, because I would always say that, you know, raising money for your business is probably the most difficult business activity you'll ever do, particularly when it comes to raising equity as opposed to debt. And you know, I was going to say there's not a lot of businesses that, you know, that don't require some kind of capital intensivity. I mean, there are, but you know, I mean, anything that you want to do at scale really needs to have capital thrown at it. So you know,
Yeah.
for me nowadays, it's a matter of, you know, what businesses can I go into that you know, that I will be able to represent those in a way to an investor that I can, you know, get them interested in, and then scale it.
Yeah. So you were literally at the start, you were essentially selling parts of your business and leasing it back, like physical parts of it.
Yeah, on the first venue we had, then obviously as the second and third ones went on, we'd be financing them prior, because I guess, you know, at that point I then knew what the finance was, so I didn't need to
Yeah.
buy it and then sell it and lease back. I'd be just going saying, please, can you lend me the money to acquire this, or, you know, please, can I lease this piece of equipment?
Got it. That's so
And,
interesting.
ultimately, that's what got us in a pickle, because, you know, leasing as a business model, you know, is great and it works, but it's, you know, it's short term and it's expensive. Now, back in those days, I was the naive borrower, you know, with the let's say hungry, greedy lenders aggressively, you know, saying, yes, we'll lend you this, we'll lend you that. Now, I'm not, you know, passing responsibility for 1 minute, because ultimately, you know, I went into it with my eyes wide open, and it was me that signed the paperwork. But you know, I was signing up to a completely unsustainable business model, because you know, because back then, you know, they would allow us to finance anything. So it started off as air conditioning, you know, went on to fridges and fit out, and you know, ultimately became, you know, we could lease the paint and the wallpaper and the ashtrays on the
Jeez.
table. And what I didn't realize I was doing was just creating, you know, a very short term, you know, completely over leveraged business.
Yeah, I feel like, especially when you have the mindset of just like aggressively investing in yourself and your business, and you see opportunities like that, like to your point, I think you said eyes wide open, like, okay, wow, like I can get a cash injection, continue to grow. What I've found is that if we do that and we don't fix the problems that led to the lack of liquidity in the first place, we're just going to perpetuate the problems, and then,
Mm.
as you said, unsustainable business model. Um, it's also like you don't feel over leveraged until you're really over leveraged, and then it's almost like too late to fix it. What were
Well,
what were some of the lessons you
completely.
learned in that process?
I guess planning, you know, and being in a business that can be funded in the right way. And I see that a lot with my customers nowadays, that they'll all say, well, please can we borrow this money to to acquire this thing, or to carry out this activity. And what we're always interested in as a lender is how are we going to get out of this loan? What's the exit route? And I think my advice for any borrower is to understand how a lender thinks, and key for a lender has to be, how do you get out of a loan? How do you get your capital back if things go wrong? Because preservation of capital in lending is everything. People often get blinded by the interest rates, but the interest rates are often or usually high for a reason. But when these borrowers look at it, or when I look at a business, they say, well, we're going to go and refinance it like this, or we're going to sell the other. But the reality is, it's probably going to be very difficult to do that. Hence why you're talking to someone like me in the first place. And if you can't finance it, a business is only a good business if it can be financed properly. And very often people will come to me and say, I don't, look at this. It's a business we can buy for example, £4 million, and it's making £1 million a year. What a great opportunity. Well, as simplistic as that it is, but it depends how you're then going to go and finance that business. Okay, if you're buying it for cash, what's the opportunity cost of your return? But if you're not buying it for cash and you're buying it for debt, if you're a person who can fund that at 6% per annum, then that's a materially different proposition to someone who has to go to short-term expensive lenders and fund it for 25%, 28, 30% per annum when all of a sudden all of that profit's gone. And I think people get blinded at the beginning and probably unrealistic to whether or not they can refinance something further down the line. And ultimately that's where so many business owners do come unstuck, taking on finance that is always going to be unsustainable.
Yeah, I've been building, I call like my adult entrepreneurial journey last, like 6 years maybe. And it's been really interesting, specifically over the last 2 years, to see how expensive money has gotten. Like offers that we were getting for financing in our business, like it cost well more than double. Sometimes like egregiously, like you could argue it should probably be illegal type of aggressively expensive. But even just 18 months ago, it was nowhere near it. So it's cool to kind of see, everyone talks about how everything's cyclical. It's interesting to see like the different seasons, even on such a short term, because we've seen such interesting changes over the last couple of months, which makes sense with the printing of cash in the States and everything that's gone on in the world.
I think there's two sides there as well, though. That yes, obviously the cost has gone up, and for genuine businesses, it's an irritant or it's a problem. But I think there's also far too many crap businesses out there. Whether they're zombie businesses or crap businesses that have only survived off the back of easy and cheap capital. And we've been kind of saying this since COVID. Because when COVID started, there'd been too much easy money and cheap capital available for the years before that, and COVID was thought of as what was going to be the reset, but then didn't happen because the exact opposite happened, because so much new money was plugged into the system then, and we're starting to obviously feel a lot of pain now, but as bad as it may sound to many, the pain needs to come, and these crap businesses do need to go. So it can be a wake up call for some, and clear the way for the people who can operate a business properly on the right metrics and on the right KPIs. Because too often, and this was my problem back in 2004, 5, 6, 7. Ultimately, if I hadn't have had such easy capital available to me, I would have had to make very different decisions. I think people think they're a business, they're an entrepreneur just because they own a business, and they get to prolong that delusion by having access to easy money.
Yeah. What is there anything that you would have done differently, or like in those early years?
It's funny, really, because you know, I've been asked that question a couple of times lately, and it's the first time I've really had to think about it. And the problem is, if you know, I look back and I say the only thing I should have done differently is finance the business better, you know, with a deeper equity base or a lower cost of capital. But I also couldn't have done it because that didn't exist for the kind of businesses I had. You know, like
Yeah.
the fact that we were a strip club meant that mainstream operators didn't want, sorry, mainstream lending institutions didn't want to deal with someone like us. Hence why we were pushed onto the short-term expensive people, and you know, we borrowed money at those rates from those people because it was all we could do. So looking back, I only really had, you know, I could say I should have done it differently, but that option wasn't really available to me. So I guess I just need to look at it as a positive experience and say that you know, I've learned my lessons now, so I don't have to repeat them now. But if I, you know, back then I would never have been able to do that business and tell the story here today.
Yeah, that's always the interesting part, right? It's like if we did it differently and we avoided it, then we wouldn't have gotten the lessons, right? And sometimes we had no option but to endure it, like you did. Um, what what advice would you have for a business owner who maybe someone's listening to this and they went down a similar path because money was easily accessible and they have a business that's still producing cash, but they're now in a position where they feel like they're over leveraged because they didn't solve the problems that led to the need for the capital in the first place. What advice would you have for someone like that now that the market and the tides are turning a little bit?
I mean, I think the problem that most business owners have, you know, when it comes to, you know, their over leveraged businesses, is that they can't see the wood from the trees. You know, either that's because they're in it, and you know, and they just, you know, they just kind of can't step back and have that pair of eyes to actually see that they genuinely are over leveraged, or they are too proud to admit it and are delusional enough to think that they can fight their way out of the problem. And I say this from experience because in hindsight, you know, I was that person. And so often now I'll look at businesses that just, you know, making up the numbers, but for example, make it say £100,000 a year, but they've managed to accumulate £1 million of debt. and and someone will come to me and say, right, you know, we need to borrow some money because we either need to refinance that £1 million of debt, or we just need some more money to get through the next few months. I'm saying, but you're absolutely insane. You know, if that, even if we didn't charge any interest on that £1 million, it's going to take you another 10 years to pay it down. You know, yes, you've got a nice part of your business there, but you've got a very crap part of your business as well. And what you need to do is just be honest and humble enough to realize you've made the mistakes, hold your hands up, take some professional advice, and go through some kind of insolvency process, and take the good bits of the business and come back out of the other side. And nobody wants to do it because, you know, everybody, I guess, thinks of bankruptcy as such a final event, and you know, and listen, there's no two ways about it. It comes with its connotations. But if you're in a pickle, you know, sometimes if you're in a pickle, you just need to put your hands up and admit you're in a pickle, and come out the other side. And very often I'll say to some of these business owners, listen, mate, I'm not going to put whatever you're asking for, 200 or 300 grand, into this £1 million mess, the £1 million hole you've got. But I can see you've got a decent business there. So let me work with you, let me advise you and help you dump that debt, come out the other side. I'll hold your hand through the very uncomfortable conversations you're going to have with some people. But whether you have the uncomfortable conversations today or you have them in 6 months or 2 years, those uncomfortable conversations are coming. and the longer you prolong the agony for, really the worse the conversations are going to be, the higher your stress levels are. And the kind of analogy I give to bankruptcy is that people always think of bankruptcy as this horrible thing where, I don't know, like someone's going to, you know, if it was physical pain, cut them up and stamp on them and kneecap them, all these things. But the reality is you're already in that position. And it's almost like, you know, you're a cancer patient who's been suffering for years, you know, going through chemotherapy and, you know, and all the horrendous things that go with it, and never knowing how you're going to come out at the end. And then you die. You know, if anything, the death is a blessing for, you know, for somebody who's had to live that horrendous life. You know, for the past few years. And if you're in the state of needing to go bankrupt, you've probably been living You've not been concentrating on your business. You spend your whole life juggling cash flow, dealing with red letters, probably having staff leave you, because even if you're deluded enough to think that no one notices the problems, your staff do know what's going on, etc. And it'll be an uncomfortable couple of months. But with the right advice and the right support, you can take the good bits of that business and come out the other side again.
Yeah.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds like just ripping the Band-Aid off and like taking
Yeah,
the humility.
exactly.
Yeah. When you say uncomfortable conversations, you're talking about with friends and family, you're talking about with financiers, with clients, all the above?
Probably with many stakeholders, undoubtedly with creditors, because you've got yourself into a position where you've got creditors that you can't pay, and the reality is, whether you tell them today or whether you tell them in 6 months' time, you can never pay them. You've got a business that that just doesn't make enough money, and you've racked up all that debt. You may need to lose some staff because you've got too many staff, or you need to make some changes. So there'll be uncomfortable conversations to have, but like I said, they are coming, and it's just a matter of how much rot you let kick in before you do actually have the conversations. And I say this as someone, going back to your question, you said, what would I have done differently? I guess the one thing I could have done differently is realize 6 or 9 or 12 months before I did realize that this business was untenable, and go and try to have some conversations when I probably had a bit less debt, and the market maybe wasn't as bad as it was, and try to restructure things. But I mean, I remember, because my lenders were still lending to me even as late as 2 or 3 months before I went under. And I borrowed back in June, July of 2008. I borrowed another £1 million off a particular lender. That every penny of that went into paying payroll and working capital requirements, and making the payments to the other lenders that month. And literally within a month or two, all that money was gone up in smoke because we were so because we were in such a pickle. And if I'd have had the realism, the lack of delusion, the kind of knowledge or whatever to have looked at that and realized that situation was never getting fixed, I could have probably dealt with it 9 or 12 months earlier. And rather than it being a £40 million hole for me, it could have been a £30 million hole that may have been able to have been dealt with very differently.
Yeah, it sounds like it comes back to the unsustainability of it, and how the lending kind of masked the problems that existed, that kind of probably led to the need for the lending in the first place.
Exactly.
Super interesting. What's the before we wrap up here, what's the big focus for you now? So you're investing, you're lending, like what exactly are you doing now if people are interested in following along?
Well, my core business is lending. Like I say, I raise money from investors who've got an appetite to generate an income from secured debt, and I lend it on a secured basis to businesses back in the UK. That has been for the last probably 10 years, and will continue to be the core of our business. We do a little bit of venture capital. I mean, we don't really make equity investments, but sometimes we do some stretch debt lending, which then gives us an equity position in businesses. But I guess I've been building a group of companies that we provide capital to, that we provide sales, marketing, finance, accountancy support, etc. to, and that's been my focus for a long time. I mean, on a personal level, I guess my day-to-day job at the minute is spent trying to find higher caliber staff. Not, I won't say high caliber, I don't mean I want to swap out some of the ones I've got, but high caliber staff to make my life easier, because I mean I've spent too long getting dragged into the minutiae, because I've been the only person capable of doing some things, and I don't want to be that person. I want to be able to look with the helicopter view and do more and more things. But I have my own podcast. I have my own personal brand. I enjoy. I mean, I get paid at work to support businesses and provide them help and capital. But I also enjoy doing it, doing it for free on my social media, on my podcast, on my website, and my channel. So yeah, anybody who wants to find me, I'm kind of the Matt Haycox. That's TheMattHaycox on all things social. I'm matt-haycox.com online, and listen to the podcast, follow me on social, and if I'm talking about what you like, or you've got a business that wants to borrow some money, then I'd love to hear from you.
I love it. Well, you took my next question, which is going to be, where can people find you? So guys, that will be in the show notes. Get connected, show some love, all that fun stuff. Matt, last question I have for you here. Going all the way back, right? Kind of starting to flip whatever products you can get your hands on, getting into the business world, eventually getting into the pub scene in 2004, moving into the strip club world by 2008, the massive portfolio that you've amassed, and then experiencing August 2008, all the lessons learned there, all the way to where you're at right now, right? Running the successful businesses, lending, living in Dubai, a beautiful new child in your arms, this entire window, right? What's been the biggest lesson that you've learned that has yielded the most results and had the biggest impact on your life and in your business?
That I shouldn't have the ego to try and do everything alone, and be the big boss, be the big owner. That I can achieve a lot more, a lot quicker by sharing the pie and partnering up with other people. I think that's thing number one. And thing number two is that all the information that you want, all the information I want, and everything you want to achieve is already out there. You just need to know how to find those people and go and ask them for it. And I think I probably did a bit of that by default in the early days, but it's really only over the last few years that I've really started to appreciate it. And if I could tell my younger self something, it would be to not want to hog everything, not feel that I've got to be the kingpin, just to, I guess, decide what the end game is and go and reverse engineer that along the way. And undoubtedly that would involve sharing more with other people and partnering up with other people along the way.
Boom. There it is. Matt, thanks for joining me, brother. Really enjoyed this.
Oh, thanks for having me, mate. Thank you.
100%.